So welcome. This is the second class in the series of Living Outside the Box. So the question I'd like for us to consider is, what is it that makes you feel the most alive? Like, when do you feel the most alive? And you can think about times during the day, and perhaps you go, well, days are kind of humdrum. I just go through the routines. Oh, I can recall some times I really felt alive when I was at fill in the blank, Big Bend, the Grand Canyon, looking out in the country at the stars at night, listening to some wonderful music, and think about the ways that you felt different during those times as compared to the way that you usually felt. So you could even imagine like a little graph aliveness indicator, and it'd be way up there during those times. And during the rest of the time, taking care of chores, doing your routine, going shopping, whatever. And it could be some enjoyable sorts of things, but nothing really spectacular, and the aliveness meter would be down quite a bit. And then you might ask yourself, why is it that I don't have a lot more time in my life that I feel like this? And how can I get to feeling more like this, which doesn't require you to pick up and move to some spectacular place? You don't have to uproot your life, but we're going to be talking about ways that you can feel like that during the ordinary course of your day.
Yes. So we said, well, there's living inside the box, which is a constricted kind of state, and that would be the times when you're not so much alive. And then being outside of the box, which would be things that are opening you to something new, and you are opened and bringing other things to something new. And it got me to think about, well, when we're just talking about connecting with things, as we said last time, when we're outside of the box, we're connecting to more things that are in existence. That's one thing, but that's still kind of a binary or separated way of thinking about everything. And we want to be thinking about everything as merging within and co-inhabiting the universe rather than separated out. So I think what came to mind then was our emotions, our feelings, and like you were saying, feeling more alive. That's part of it also. But how about even when we're feeling down, when we're feeling something very strong? Maybe we're missing family that's far away. These emotions are huge, and they seem to me to be part of the whole story. Well, in the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims, there's a whole section involving what was the beginning of everything. And from what they say, they say God, but whatever we're talking about, the very beginning, whoever that is, was a hidden treasure, yearning to be known, yearning to be loved. And so the start of everything, and that which pulls everything together and makes sense of everything, is desire. In the Sufi tradition, it's called ishq, I-S-H-Q. And to me, the sound of that ishq sounds like what it is, a yearning. And so a lot of our spiritual discovery has to do with our yearning. Like you've already discussed here, what is it that makes you feel most alive? But also what pulls you down the most, and what is the achiest part, and how does that have to do with the whole story? Well, the tradition that we're bringing to you, that is a big part of the whole story, and it's a study and something that we need to find out more of. And it also shows how important the individual is to this whole story. So that rather than you thinking of this is how everything is, and we have this mental image of how it all is, it comes from our hearts. So we'll talk more about the heart.
Yeah, so there are ways that we open up to feeling more alive, but there are habitual ways that we close ourselves off from that. And so we create filters around ourselves. And we don't realize that we're doing it because we're so used to doing that. And we're used to it because so many people in the world are so used to doing that. It's like numbing ourselves in a way. And why do we do that? Well, there are a lot of painful realities going on in the world, and we don't want to open up to feeling those things. What can we do about it? But even in our daily life, there may be things that we're not giving ourselves scope to expressing. Like Diane was mentioning, these desires, and maybe they stay kind of buried. Like we have a thought of something. Well, I'd really like to try my hand at painting, but I don't know anything about it. Or I'd like to learn a musical instrument. Nah, I wouldn't be any good at that. I'm too busy or whatever. And so we have our ways of just sometimes immediately shutting down desires that might be a real positive way to open up to a richer way of experiencing things. So we talked a little last time about this idea of there being an allegory of our soul. And our allegory is the story of our life. So imagine that you're looking at a book that's current about your life. It's a story of your life, and you're looking through it, and it'd be kind of biographical. You'd see major events, you'd see ups and downs and so on, up to the present, and you might project ahead into the future what you think it's going to look like down the road, but it's just kind of contained within a somewhat narrow scope of experiences. You're not probably thinking about some things that might lead to real breakthroughs and transformations. On the other hand, if you look back at your life and you've been on a journey of spirituality, the times that have really brought about transformation were very significant events that took you out of the usual routine and propelled you into something else. And they could be wonderful things, they could be very traumatic things, but they kind of yanked the rug out from under you where the old stuff wasn't going to work anymore. So I'll be talking a little bit more today about what I think is a fundamental property of life itself. And Diane mentioned the mystics talk about creation occurred because the divine was this hidden treasure desiring to know and be known. But I really believe it's the nature of existence, period, to always organize to a higher state of awareness of itself, to become conscious of itself. And I believe I mentioned last week about Seth Lloyd, who's a computer scientist at MIT, who postulated in Scientific American, no less, that the universe is like a giant quantum computer. And when asked, well, what is it computing? And he said itself. It's like it's trying to understand itself. It's like, whoa, this is in Scientific American, the same kind of idea. So each of us on an individual level is a microcosmic part of that. We're pursuing a path of awakening because we want to know ourselves better. We want to know the nature of the reality that we're in, but we exist in a deeply interconnected reality, and the whole reality itself is seeking to know itself. So what's one of the side effects of, so to speak, of feeling more alive and doing things that make you more alive? It's going to further this process of you not only knowing yourself, but making something available to the totality to be able to know itself in a deeper way. So it's a way of fulfilling our purpose in life.
And we each have our own ways of doing that. We find out as we explore perhaps some painting, we explore some musical aspects. We sing, or we can play an instrument or something like that, and then we feel what that brings through us. And then we notice what happens when other people listen to those things that we might have played for them, or look at the art that we have. So I'd like to use this word conspiring. There's an amazing conspiring that's happened I would say too that there's something in your lives that brought this class up. That, there was like, oh, I wish I had just a little bit more. And that we wanted to share some things so that it's like a dance. And you can't say, well, I was the one that started this. Something brought you into that dance. I brought this because of that kind of idea. So what is this idea? Well, this is, and I wore something similar to that. You might have noticed that spring happens, and what happens to us? I was a teacher, and I tell you, when those kids were sitting in their seats and spring was happening, they were springing right out of the seats, wanting to be elsewhere and looking out the window, and it was impossible to just keep that emotion, that joy for living down. And when Sufis dance. So in our tradition, not all the branches of the Sufi tradition, but there's one especially that you might have seen whirling dervishes before, that they whirl, they put their arms up and they turn, and they feel that they are in harmony with all the orbits of the planets and all the suns and stars and everything that whirls, everything that as it's bringing itself outward. If you look at the pattern of this even, and I didn't notice all these little babies up here, they're sprouting out. I just noticed the ones up here, and I broke it off and set it down. And if you look, this is like a spiral, because we got little bigger, and larger, and also the way they move when they're unfurling, and there's this beautiful spiraling that's going on in the whole universe. It's like the emotion of what is happening even creates patterns. And we see patterns in everything that's around us. When we look in nature, it's not an accident that when we walk in nature that we feel relaxed, just that we're getting some air or something. We're looking at everything around us, and the patterns are our patterns. If we look at our own hands and we look at how we're made, and even like the little parts of us, the little bits that fall off, little bits of skin or things like that become part of the earth. And there's this incredible song, there's an incredible story about all of that brings us all together. So it's not just a mental idea of how everything is set up. It's something that pulls us into the dance of it.
So if we're wanting to live outside the box, what does that mean? Well, we have to open up to connecting with other beings who perhaps have been living inside their boxes, so we can find a way of circulation between these different forms in existence. So we talked some last time about ways to be present. So again, each of you listening to what I'm saying right now is physically present, but if you have a lot on your mind, you may not be so much mentally present. You might be thinking about the Super Bowl, or you might be thinking about some concern that you have, or whatever. Or if you have something that's troubling you in your heart, some emotion, you might be dealing with some difficult feeling that makes it hard for you to be fully present. But if you're able to step outside the box and open up to just the fullness of whatever state that you're in, not trying to change it like a Pollyanna thing, oh, everything is just wonderful, I'm going to just ignore this other stuff, but you bring all of yourself to whatever circumstance that you're in, and then you can really connect with whatever it is you're experiencing. And like Diane mentioned, what you see reflected in nature. You've heard me say before about Hazrat Inayat Khan saying there's only one sacred scripture, and the pages of that scripture are the leaves on the trees. And he was meaning it's just everywhere. Everywhere you look is a manifestation of the oneness that each of us is a part of. But if we step back into our box, and we can do that through just being stuck in concepts, we can do that by being stuck in emotional reactions to circumstances. We frequently do that by our attitude in response to what's going on. We're in some situation we don't like, so probably it's human nature what's going to immediately come to us. I really don't like this. I want to get out of here. This is, I don't want to have to deal with this. I'm going to just go someplace else where I can, now I can be myself. But think about how much...
That's not the getting out of the box.
Right, but think how much energy it takes to not be yourself a lot of the time if you have some circumstances that are very difficult, and you're not being yourself when you're kind of imagining to a future point in time when perhaps this is over with. Oh, now I can exhale. Well, Sufis or mystics of all traditions talk about the importance of the breath. And where we're not fully present, sometimes we don't breathe fully. If you get really frightened, you are perhaps holding your breath like, or breathing very shallow, or your breathing is really out of rhythm, and that's another way that keeps us from being present. So we can turn the focus back down to just ordinary, particular situations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And again, imagine if you had like a instrument that measures how alive you were feeling in those circumstances, and you're watching this timeline go by and it has images of the different circumstances, and think about how much of the time that aliveness meter was not up very high, and think of how much of the time that perhaps you did things to reinforce yourself not being able to feel alive because you didn't want to be present to it, because you didn't know how to relate to it in a way that would open things up. So we're going to be talking a little bit later about, well, how do you do that? How do you stay in the thick of things and not shut yourself down and open to a fuller state of being?
Okay. So we're finding that we have choices. We're finding that, we can bring that great consciousness that we have and being able to analyze and all that stuff to thinking about, well, what would help this situation then? How can I be more a part of the situation and contribute during every moment, not just certain times? So...
You have a poem?
Well, I have a poem, and it's a little bit different than where we are right now, but I guess it's branching off from what we were doing a little bit earlier. But again, just focus on the wanting to involve our emotions, wanting to involve our energy, bring our energy into the story. This is called Precious One. There is a treasure that you hold that you don't even know you have. It may wake you up at night, startle you out of sleep. You may feel inferior to something that looks so pure. But wait, you are now the raw material of transformation. You at your most vulnerable, most manifest, most separate, but also the most connected with a needy self, and uncovered from masks that like band-aids hide the wound that really needs healing. Don't cover it up. Take this precious self into meditation. You are raw and ready for the gift. This self is like a strong magnet, ready for the sure transformation the Divine One can't resist. Focus on your heart. Offer it up. It is the altar. So, even those places that are so needy and wanting are very important parts of your path.
And that line that you are the raw material of transformation, we've talked in the past about the idea of alchemy, which has been around for thousands of years, and the exoteric kind of public meaning of it was transforming base metal into gold. Well, the reason for that is they had to have kind of a cover story for one to get funding, because if you're a king, you're probably going to want to fund an operation that's going to turn your lead into gold. You'll be richer. But also people could relate to that idea. But really alchemy was not about that. It was about transforming ourselves, I believe, into from a state of limitation into a human hyphen divine being, to really become the fullness of what it's possible for us to be. And throughout history, there have been the exemplars of these beings. There's been Christ and Buddha and Moses and Muhammad and Krishna and Shiva and just so many great beings from the different traditions who were embodying what's possible for the human being, but none of them felt what they wanted was for everyone to become like them. You won't find one place where one of them said something like that, become just like me. They wanted people to realize what was possible for them. And I last time referred to this line of Jesus in the scriptures where he said that all that I am and all that I've done, you can be and more. So he was not wanting people to turn into a clone of him. He's wanting them to become the fullest possibility of the uniqueness of themselves. Okay, so I talked about attitude a little while ago, about how you can change your attitude to a circumstance to lead to an opening instead of a shutting down. So what if you start to think about the situations in your life, especially the ones that you don't like, that are challenging? Maybe they're just boring. I've got this job and it's just, it's just not much life to it or whatever, and you just feel like you're kind of stuck in a rut. But what if you think about whatever it is that's going on in your life is the raw material, as Diane mentioned in her poem, for transformation? Well, that's another way of saying it's the raw material for alchemy to take place. And what has changed with that alchemy? Well, again, the cover story, so to speak, although this is a positive cover story, but it's not the whole picture, that you're probably thinking, well, that sounds pretty good. I want to become this enlightened, awakened, illuminated being, so, I'm going to do these things, maybe learn from this teacher so I can become this. That's great. But that's not the whole story at all. The rest of the story, if you remember Paul Harvey, and some of you probably remember, and now the rest of the story. The rest of the story is all of existence is engaged in an ongoing alchemical process of transformation of itself. And how does that take place? It takes place through the possibilities that can arise from the transformation of every single part of that totality, not in isolation, but in relationship to everything else. So our journey of awakening is not a solo venture, although oftentimes it's thought of like that. And in a lot of historical traditions, people would just thought to become awakened, they had to get away from society, they had to go in India, go live in a cave, go live in the mountains, or go live in an ashram, Christianity, go live in a monastery or something, that you really couldn't get to the furthest point if you had to deal with the challenges of life. If you're a householder, well, you could become a good person, but there's a limit to what you could do. But if you're really serious, this is what you do. Like, that's better than usual. Well, that's not better at all. And I think as human consciousness changes, people are realizing, well, where that transformation really needs to take place, if the world as a whole is going to change, is right in the thick of life. So you are doing a service when you're engaging in a process that enables you to feel more alive. And it starts with recognizing when you're stuck, when you've put filters on, when you've kind of just shut down the potentials of what could take place, and you open up sometimes to feelings, as Diane mentioned. They may not be the pleasant feelings, they may be hurtful feelings, they may be very difficult feelings, but Pierre Vilayat, who was our teacher for many years, would say we don't want to engage in what he called the spiritual bypass, which really was the norm for spirituality for a lot of the 60s and 70s. Well, just get away from this mundane stuff and just go into a transcendental realm of love, light, and bliss. And it created some very unbalanced people who had a tremendous difficulty in dealing with life in the world, which is not what we're looking for.
So in the path that we have been following, one of the main techniques is, first of all, to recognize that there are amazing gifts all around us. And in particular, if you took up any book of scripture and looked through it, there are certain qualities that you'd find: love, harmony, and beauty, compassion, forgiveness, all these wonderful concepts, ideas. But they are really not they're more than concepts. They're things that we really can work with in order to bring them into our lives. And again, many of these spiritual teachers would speak of these different qualities, and those would arise within us. It would be a beautiful thing. But now that we're thinking about living in the world and dealing with things around us and our situations, then each one of us can be a laboratory for working with these different, like you were talking about, alchemy, different chemicals. Let's say love is one, harmony, awareness are different chemicals. If you bring them into your laboratory, try them, put your mind on them, remember them more, see them as you're taking a walk in nature, seeing them emerging. But let's say you're focusing in your life, you felt that maybe I need a little more compassion, let's say, with those people that I work with, instead of me feeling like I've got to kind of put a wall between us and try to avoid them as much as possible. Let me try some compassion. So we use this chemical within our laboratory, and we try it. We say the sound of it. There's some ways to say these sounds that actually the meaning and the sound are one. It's amazing. They've devised their languages just for that. So you say the sound, and you meditate with that and feel it. And then you notice the world around you. You try to use that kind of quality, and you see what happens when you do. And then it's possible sometimes to have a teacher that you share your feelings with, or a friend, and incorporate a lot more of these different qualities as one way of going about a transformation.
So if we're going to find a way of feeling more alive and relating in a deeper way to the totality, we have to have what you might call a plug-in. Well, how do we connect? What's our way of connecting? And it's not the same for everyone. So in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about the different pathways of yoga. It talks about bhakti, the path of devotion, karma, the path of action, jnana, the path of knowledge and wisdom. And people have different inclinations as to what's most natural to them. So sometimes there's a misconception about spirituality that it's just got to be a certain way. That means you need to sit and meditate a lot, you need to do all these practices and so on, which can be extremely helpful. I think that whichever pathway someone has, there are practices that can be very helpful to them. But that's not the only way to connect to a deeper reality. And it's important for us to honor whichever one is natural to ourselves. It's like our major modality of relating, and ask ourselves, well, how can we allow more opportunities for us to express through this particular pathway in life? So if let's say you feel your natural pathway is jnana, wisdom, and knowledge, then it may be really exploring. And that doesn't mean reading 50 books. It might be sitting in meditation. And this is a practice I've used for years and years, which I've mentioned before, sitting with a question about something that often pertains to a connection between spirituality and some discovery in science, but just putting it out and then getting into a open, relaxed, receptive state and waiting for something to come back. And something always will come back. Hazrat Khan said something wonderful. He said there is no desire that ultimately won't be fulfilled either in this life or beyond. And when he talks about desire, he says that every desire begins with a divine impulse. So sometimes that original desire gets distorted because you might be thinking, well, I have some desires that don't seem very spiritual or divine. Well, maybe they've been turned 180 degrees. So if we can recover what that original desire was and then realize, well, we have something to do with how that desire is manifest, that ishq that Diane was talking about earlier, and it has to do with the uniqueness of who we are. That desire was kind of just a launching point. And if we can think of this, imagine this shift in our attitude of the very same circumstances that we were wishing to go away. Here instead is our golden opportunity to fulfill this desire by a shift in our way of relating to that same circumstance, a shift in our perspective, a shift in our attitude. And Pure Light would often talk about, if we're having difficulty with a person, see if you can get into the consciousness of that other person. Well, that's very powerful, because we usually sit with all these assumptions, but if you can imagine seeing through their eyes, looking at their own life, then perhaps you have a totally different outlook and you can understand, well, maybe this is why they've gotten caught up in a certain way of being, but you can see beyond the surface appearance. We've talked in the past about something called tawil, which means harmonic perception. It's seeing beyond the superficial appearance of things. And we can do that externally with what we perceive in our environment, but, excuse me, we can also do that with ourselves, because we get caught up in an image of who we are that we tend to assume is fixed, and we can't do a whole lot about it. Maybe we can polish a little bit off here and change a little bit about there, but people often say, well, that's just the way I am, right? And a more accurate statement would be, well, that's the way that I've become, Pure Light might say, that's the way I've become conditioned to be, but just because I've been habituated to be this way throughout most of my life, that doesn't mean that's the reality of who I am, and that doesn't mean that's the reality of what the limitations are to what I can become. What would I like to be? Pure Light would say, what if you could be, how did he say that? It's beyond what you could see. If you could free yourself from that.
You would be what you could be.
Yeah, if you would be what you could be.
That kind of thing.
What would you want that to be? And it's not like it's sitting out there waiting for you to open the right door. Oh, there I am. You're creating it. And sometimes it's scarier to think about creating something because it's a lot more comfortable just to go, well, it's already been prefigured. Even if you don't like it much, it's like, okay, this is what it is. But if you go, well, I have the freedom to do something else, and what would I like for it to be? When I was in my psychology practice, oftentimes when I was working with someone who had been really depressed for a long time, I would give them an assignment to imagine what their life might look like if they were no longer depressed. And it was often very difficult for them to do that. They couldn't even conceive of it. But I said, even if it doesn't seem like a reality, just if you had a magic wand, and once they could see something that was different from how it had been, they were no longer trapped in their assumptions about the way that they'd been. Their identity was no longer, I am a depressed person. Their identity was, okay, I am someone who is moving towards becoming, and they would have to fill in the blank.
So I'm going to gather up a few of these ideas that we've been talking about here, that what I hear in what you're saying and that I'm saying. And some of it has to do with understanding some techniques that we were talking about, things you can do to maybe change things up a little bit and not have exactly the same situation that you're seeing out here. So you're trying things, or having the laboratory that I was talking about, and at the same time you're using your desires as fuel, you might say. You know that certain things you race for, you really want. You were talking about acai or sia berries, and having a drink that has this intense purple. And, you feel, okay, I want that. So, it's like fuel. You got that fuel going for you. It's pushing your rocket ship in a certain way. So we can think about those things that we would like to try different, but then incorporate our desires in some way about that. Maybe it involved bringing some people along to do these things that we'd like to do. But finding the joy, and also analyzing and thinking about how things could be better. And not only that, but also this confidence and this, hearing about Jesus telling us that we can be like Jesus and better, and then feeling and learning about uniqueness, that there's some things that you bring that no one else brings. And if you don't express what you have, then it won't be there. That somehow, I guess, things will change in another kind of way, but they won't be quite the same. So, try not to get a guilt trip about that one. Just thinking about what those possibilities are. So that you've got the encouragement, you've got the fuel, and then you've got some ideas to work with. And it's like an art opportunity also, this creative process to be really creating from right now, which is a way that Don and I think about how creation is, that it wasn't just creation at the very beginning. There's a recreating happening all the time at the very deepest levels of everything. And then, so what does that mean? That we have something to do with that then. And maybe we don't as much. There was a wonderful teacher, a Hindu teacher, that wasn't really very well known himself, but he taught somebody who transformed a huge amount of India. And maybe that's what your kind of influence would be. That one person that you talk to in such a way that they, oh my gosh, or you go and do something with them that, sparks something in 20 other people. You never know how any of that's going to look to this individual that's here. When we take the wider look of all that, there's a process that we can do, and without looking for results right away.
And in participating in this process, and going back to the idea of the allegory of our soul, so there's the vision for what we might like the story to look like into the future. And I talked about, what's our plug-in to the totality? And there's different pathways for that. It could be wisdom, it could be devotion, and so on. But in addition to all this, it's important for us to have a working metaphor for what's going on. What does that mean? It's kind of like our description of the process of what's going on at a certain stage in our life. And that has to do with our metaphor for how we think of as us in relation to the whole picture. So Hasranayat Khan would talk about it was important for people to have an ideal if they were wanting a way of relating to God or to the beloved. They had to have an ideal which could change, or an image. It could be as the father, the mother, the friend, and so on. But it also could be, Pirvalaya would say, the term God has gotten so much baggage associated with it that he would often not use that. Instead, he would just talk about the universe with a capital U. It's the one reality that all of us exist in, whatever name that you want to give it. So some people might think of it, I'll call it the transcendent. Seth Lloyd would call it the quantum computer. Cosmologists talk about that our Big Bang might have been one of a potentially infinite number of Big Bangs creating other universes. So each one of those you could think was the beginning of an opportunity for the totality expressed in that universe to come to know itself. So whatever that way is, it's important that it fits for you. So a lot of times when people are saying, well, I don't believe in God, it's the God that they don't believe in is the God of the Middle Ages, which was this being sitting up in the sky that was either not involved at all in existence or was very judgmental and so on, and you were rewarded for doing good and you were punished for doing bad. And as consciousness has changed and what's come with quantum physics and an awareness of there's a deep underlying reality that nothing could ever be outside of. It's inconceivable for there to be something that's not part of this deeply interconnected reality. And in this deeply interconnected reality, it's the nature of life for awareness to arise. Well, here we are. And even bacteria have a certain degree of awareness. They can learn to avoid things that are not good for them and so on. And one-celled organisms can learn things like that. So it's not just particular human beings, but we certainly have more of a capacity for this awareness of participating. So you might ask yourself, well, what's my metaphor for right now? What's my story? And the parables that have been given by teachers throughout history are examples of working metaphors that many of which were appropriate for the time in which they're given, but don't fit so much right now. Like, not too many of us are shepherds herding sheep. You know, that metaphor doesn't work so well right now. Excuse me. So we need to create a story that fits for us, but we also need to have a willingness to let go of that story. Excuse me. And adopt a new metaphor that fits with what's going on.
Why don't you help us with the meditation?
Okay, just a second. So let's do a little meditation. So in Hinduism, there's this beautiful image known as Indra's jewels. So imagine these just gorgeous jewels, but there's like an infinite number of them, and they're just spread out, and you can't possibly see the whole thing. But if you zoom in on one particular jewel, you can see within that jewel all the other jewels are present within that one, and so on to whatever level that you're looking at. So imagine yourself as being one of those jewels. And you contain within yourself a connection to all the other jewels, which is another way of saying every other expression of the one, which exists uniquely, but every expression contains within it a connection to every other expression. So you can either imagine connecting with someone, it could be with another person, you find their consciousness outside yourself where they are, or you can imagine turning within and you can just as deeply connect with them within your own being, the same degree of connectedness. Now imagine as you're kind of surveying the lay of the land of all these jewels and your connection with them, open up to a feeling of desire within your being. And it's a desire to love, perhaps to know, to experience the bounty, the richness of every other part of this one reality. And it's almost this desire, you might even imagine feeling like this energy pulling you, drawing you. And perhaps you imagine it being like a sound, maybe like the music of the spheres. Now, at the same time, you're experiencing this desire you have within your own being for this way of connecting. See if you can shift your focus and imagine a cosmic, grand desire of all of this, the totality, longing to deeply feel and know every single part, down to every atom. So there are these two pulls. One is kind of pulling outwards from you, and then there's one from the cosmic level. It's like drawing towards you. And feel these desires meeting in your heart. And as they meet, just feel yourself becoming so much more alive. Feel your emotions, such deeper love from you, and also a feeling of being loved by everything in existence. You're longing to know about all in the totality, and feeling the longing of the totality to know you, that which can only be known through you. And as these two desires meet, feel like this light just unfurls, opens, scintillating. Feel yourself bathing in and bathed by this light, permeating every cell of your body, permeating all the subtle energy centers of your body, what the yogis call the chakras, what the Sufis call the lataif. And just like the little plant that Diane brought to share with us today, feel like not only you are sprouting, but feel that all of life throughout all of existence is sprouting in a never-ending process of a deeper and deeper capacity for what can be. And feel that you and all of existence are continually engaged in a process to transform into something infinitely more precious than gold. Amen.